Victor, we wanted to tap into your deep experience in trade compliance today and speak about a variety of topics. Before we do that, do you want to give us like a very brief intro about how your career has been so far? And then we can get into the thick of things.
Sure. So I'm originally from Portugal. At the age of 18, I went to South Korea on a study stay. When I came back to Portugal, that's where I started actually my career. So I spent 18 years in logistics supply chain roles across different industries like textiles, like medical devices, motorcycles, and industrial machinery until I moved to the UK. And as I had already some previous contact with customs and I wanted to know the end to end of exporting, basically, I decided to shift my career to learn the rudiments. And I didn't imagine at the time that I would really start a new career in trade compliance. So ever since I'm in trade compliance, and so 5 years in the UK, 8 years in the Netherlands now. And it's been, amazing experience. And when I look back after a while, after being in the Netherlands, I realized I was a trade compliance professional 18 years in the making.
That's awesome. That's awesome. I think working in different countries also gives you additional perspective on how the rules are different and how the culture is different. But it's amazing that all these systems and you guys put together make amazing world of global trade work.
But I always liked, know more about other cultures, languages. I speak a few languages as well. So it's always good to get the dimension as well and understand also how those details also matter a lot in international trade and in organizations.
Yeah, absolutely. Can you talk a bit about your current company, CCR, in how global trade or how import export really helps the business grow? Because it's a refrigeration company. You guys build some industrial machinery. Sounds pretty sophisticated. I'm sure it takes a lot to do that. But what is the contribution of your partners whom you import from that's making the business work as it is today?
So first of all, I like to make a little disclaimer that the opinions that I'm, disclosing here are but my own. I don't necessarily represent the company I work for. Okay. So the role of trade compliance at CCR is evolving quickly because we're forming part of Carrier, that the company, widely known and US based. So there was a spin-off, and of course the role evolved with that and has to also support the business in every possible way. In this case, we have manufacturing bases here in Europe, but also in the Far East. And now also, I believe we are also looking into the American continent as well. So to keep up with that evolution of the company and at the same time provide all support there in the go-to market, also in decision making and also find efficiencies when it comes to customs management as well, whenever the opportunities are there for us, of course.
Understood. And just to give us a sense of the scale, just let's take an example like classification. So, what's the volume of that classification that you all do? And I'm sure that there's also a little bit of export involved. So, can you tell us a little bit of the scale of the trade compliance operation that you're?
So we are talking about roughly 200 to 300,000 materials in terms of classification. And also now that we are all at the same time moving to the same ERP environment to really harmonize that across the organization, and to really also be able to classify those materials across the different countries, the different tariffs. So roughly at the moment we are looking at 12 different tariffs. So yeah, quite a bit to be done.
That's quite complicated. While a lot of that is day-to-day work that you and your team are doing, how do you tie that back to how that work is contributing to the company's P&L? Because ultimately, every team in a company wants to contribute towards the success of the company from a financial perspective, right? And sometimes these so-called compliance things are seen as steps that you have to do, or hey, these are some check boxes that you need to check. Perhaps people don't realize that it actually impacts P&L in a material way. So as a leader, how do you do it? How do you tie it back to a financial impact? And what do you suggest folks in our audience who are perhaps struggling with tying those two things together should?
So as you said very well, so most companies look at trade compliance in a way that we are just, cost. We are, a kind of internal police that are just getting in the way of doing business. And most of them, from my experience, also only when go through a significant crisis, should we say, either internal or externally, for example, a failed audit or, for example, external events, then that really there's a pivotal moment for trade compliance within an organization to really, rise up to the challenge and be there. And as one of my peers once said, never waste a good crisis. In my experience, so, a couple of years back, a pivotal moment was Brexit here in Europe, where really a lot of companies had operations in the UK and had to scramble. There was the general conviction, oh, this is not really going to happen, and left until very last minute when there was a decision. And then immediately was, everybody was running around like headless chicken and wanting to find solutions very quickly. And for example, from my experience, that was a pivotal moment for several companies here in Europe. That really to seize the opportunity to really demonstrate the value of trade compliance. And it's been ever increasing ever since. Of course, outside that, we had also the situation in Ukraine, the whole tariff war, for example, that are really contributing to that. And us as trade compliance professionals have to really be sensible in terms of our strategy or our approach to that, because the business always expects us to present the business case. How much is it going to cost is the first question to really to get something. And if the benefit is not directly visible, immediately visible, that you cannot quantify it, you won't really get anywhere. So in the job I'm currently doing now, it's more to do with a geopolitical landscape, at least there are wars, and as things evolve, also to really look at the best strategies, but also at the same time to really supporting finding efficiencies to automation, really to make the way the import export of the company works to do it more efficiently, yeah, and really in the shortest possible time to have those transactions cleared and the company running.
Got it. Got it. And are there any specific examples that you can quote where you were able to tie the work that the team is doing, whether it is figuring out efficiencies or just doing classification on time or faster, which had a direct impact on how you were able to complete certain things that were financially beneficial to the company? Like, is there a Excel model or was there a table that you created where you were actually showing that ROI?
So actually, so the example I mentioned with Brexit was the first one where it was easy to calculate the impact based on the previous year's volumes, and then to really demonstrate, with this little investment, we can really mitigate the vast majority of the impact, and also to do basic things like re-educate your organization and say, hey, in terms of the trade lanes, that if now you use or set up a new trade lane to avoid simply going through the UK, for example, when you want to go to Ireland, you will save yourself. It may be a bit longer, for example, but you're going to save all the duties and all those other costs, for example. When it comes to other areas, one that can be a bit surprising is, of course, our focus as trade compliance professionals is to really classify the materials accurately so that we have certainty that, because if we get that wrong, we get a lot wrong, the duties and taxes, but also certain regulations. But one that may be a bit surprising is also when it comes to product conformity requirements, that when you classify on the wrong commodity code, you will trigger the wrong requirements from customs that acts on behalf of some other government agencies, for example, and slows down, for example, import export. But by doing that in terms of classification, for example, I had several cases where there was that added benefit that in terms of product conformity, that really those requirements really were not applicable to the products that weren't properly checked before. And that was easy to demonstrate that no longer other departments in the company had to step in, provide documentation and have longer lead times, for example. And when working with a mayor region, for example, that becomes very important, highly visible. And that was the case for the organization we had when I worked in the company at the time, where there were entities in those countries, and those really are at the forefront and really see the direct benefit and without much effort. Yeah. So that for
Got it.
sure happened.
And one piece that you mentioned there was very interesting, where you said when Brexit happened, you said let's start a new trade lane, say with Ireland, so that you can get around those pieces. Where do you draw the line between compliance professionals and say procurement professionals? Because in this case, when you're switching countries, you're also switching vendors, right? Or suppliers. So now who decides whether you should get it from a vendor from a different country while you're saving duty? There also needs to be a step of figuring out, are we actually getting like parts or the exact same thing that we needed earlier, right? So does that make sense? Like, how do you do
Yeah.
that
So
successfully?
it depends a lot on the organization you're in, because, for example, something like choosing a freight forwarder, for example, may end up on your desk or not, depending on how the trade compliance organization is sitting, if it's sitting in supply chain, for example. But if that's not the case, the more you educate people in procurement, in supply chain, in sales, for example, the better. And for example, I had situations where I educated people in procurement, and I was happy for them to take, to find or to understand the savings that occur from that and claiming it as theirs, because the company as a whole benefits from that. So I said it depends a lot on the organization, but either way, we have to, trade compliance professionals, if they're not directly involved in the decision making or in processes that impact trade compliance or are impacted by trade compliance, have to really polish up their soft skills to really connect with the other parts of the organization, have a coffee, because a lot in those informal conversations, you understand a lot of what's going on and where you can then immediately step in and say something. And I had a few situations like that in the past that it makes a lot of difference if you do that. But again, it's up to the knowledge or the experience you have and where you sit in the organization to really understand what can be done.
And that's very kind of you to pass on the savings credit to another team while perhaps the thinking came from your team.
Mm.
Talking about your team, and you mentioned just from a classification perspective, the volumes are so high. And I'm sure there's tons of other things like screenings and various other activities that you'll do. But how do you ultimately for your team set up some KPIs for their success so that, and how do you track them month over month, year over year?
Mhm. So in any organization, I think the KPIs for trade compliance are impacted in where trade compliance is sitting, because if it's in supply chain, there tends to be a lot more focus on operational KPIs, on how many shipments go through, the lead times, the volumes and all that. If you're in legal, that is different. And also, of course, the maturity of our organization, what are the projects or the transformation going on your company, for example, and what are the highest risk factors that you have there. So to set those KPIs. If they are pushed by other parts of our organization, they're more focusing on that operational side of it. If not, if from yours, it's different. They are more strategic, more, project related and things like that. So in my case, we are going through a big transformation. So the focus at the moment is really projects. It's really to conclude those projects successfully to ensure that the governance is there in place, things are going as they should. But in the near future, is really to, improve and set KPIs on the customs management side to really be able to have eyes on it, quantify, the volumes, the accuracy, and also to understand what can be in terms of customs clearance partners there, in terms of the decision, in terms of what kind of partnership we are looking for example. That will be the next step for me at the moment.
Understood. And is there a specific business challenge that you're working on right now? You mentioned a couple of projects. Maybe if you can deep dive into that, which you're really, really looking to finish over the next, say, 3 to 6 months. And also how the KPIs that you mentioned, like how are you tying those KPIs back into that business challenge so that you know that things are going on track?
At the moment is really the ERP rollout and the denied party screening integration with that ERP. That is really the big focus, and it will be until end of Q3 possibly. And shortly after is really the customs management, as I said, and also the record keeping. And for those, I'm starting to explore really robotic process automation to really do more with less and really have proper eyes on what's going on and be able to really improve the decision making and be, of course, audit ready. Because at least the overall panorama in the EU, that the EU this year set up the EU Customs Authority. It's probably you heard they are going to set up the EU data hub, customs data hub, for example. And we have to really look ahead and brace ourselves for that the level of scrutiny, the level of technology integration is really increasing, and we have to be prepared for that.
Got it. You mentioned words that I like, robotic process automation. Can we deep dive into that as to what your vision is over there? What is the scale at which you're thinking about it? What is the specific workflow or tasks that you feel RPA can really make an impact for your organization?
So I said that there's a lot going on. I have to take it step by step. I cannot, bite more than I can chew. But the purpose is to really start with the record keeping and directly connect to the customs management, and then as we go along to really expand it to other areas. And so we already have existing tools, and really the purpose is to maximize the usage of those tools before eventually considering anything new. And in the process, also use it to other parts that are connected to compliance. So, for example, to improve material master data management, for example, to really take it to the next level, because the quality and the governance model for material master data really impacts a lot of what we do. Not just in my case, but also other colleagues in different organizations.
I mean, to me, it sounds like technically you're in a much more advanced space while you're still building it out compared to some of the other firms that I've spoken to. Can you help people understand a little bit more? Let's break it down further. You mentioned materials master database. You mentioned a bunch of tools. Maybe we can just quickly go through what is the tool stack that you use, like tool name, and then what do you use it for, and perhaps how does it all tie up together. That I think is going to be very helpful for people, because a lot of people don't know where to start. I see a lot of teams still working in spreadsheets, and while spreadsheets are a great tool, at a different scale like you are, that's probably not going to work. So let's maybe break that down by looking at the tool stack and seeing how it all ties together.
Sure. I will take a step back and try and give the overview of what we have to look at before we really decide the next steps and the actions. So first and foremost, of course, we have to know the HDS very well. Because if we get that wrong, get it all wrong, as I said. The other is really to know the products, know the industry where you operate very well, and also to how the two tie up together, because if you identify which sections of the HTS you really will work in, you have a better understanding what you're up against, of course. Also, of course, a very important one is really the material master data quality and the governance you have in place, because that possibly, out of assuming that you master the other ones, this is probably the most important one that really will set the tone and the strategy, should we say. And of course, last and not least, the resources and the technology available to you. And so if with what you already have, whether you can use it to tackle that challenge, or if you need something else. And of course, if you need something else, you have to be able to build a business case to really demonstrate that. So at the moment, so going back also a little bit, when it comes to the master data quality, the better it is structured, the less, should we say, fancy tools you will need from my perspective. For example, if that structure is very good, with spreadsheets and VBA, for example, you can achieve very good results. But the less it is well structured, the less the governance is there, the more you're going to struggle, the more you're probably going to look into something more advanced. And of course, I try to keep up with the technological progress. And when it comes to the generalistic, AI that's out there available, it has improved in recent years compared to maybe because professionals are also using it. And as it has more data fed in, it also improves the output. I've been seeing that the specialized AI I see, it has also improved quite a bit. But so in my particular case I have now, so the existing tools we have, in this case, Power Automate with a couple of other tools, we can achieve already very good results. And so we start there, and then we'll see where our ceiling is, basically, and then see whether we will need something more or not. The challenge we all have is really to make that business case to the business. So to just look at some fancy tool in the market and say, oh, this is what I need, without really looking at what you have, what's your solution, I would say is not a good strategy, because it can be quickly dismantled by other parts of the company if you're not really able to demonstrate quickly the results, or really a solid business case behind.
Got it. No, that really helps. I think you need to take a step back, understand the problems that you need to solve, and then devise the stack. A lot of times people pick up a solution and then try to devise their teams and their processes around it, which may not be the right model. But talking about AI just for a little bit more, because you've specifically worked on, say, AI-based systems in terms of content and so on. What has really shifted, say, in the last 2 years? Like, have the LLMs, have they had an impact? Because I don't believe ChatGPT would be able to give you the HS code accurately, because it relies on internet data, not on explanatory notes and so on. So what has shifted in your view, which has made things better for not just classification, but trade compliance in general?
So from my perspective, we are still far from the full potential. Okay, the progress has been great, and you see it not just there. You see also some solution when it comes to the reduction of what we call false positives when it comes to screening, or for example, in summarizing regulations to really understand them better. In classification, maybe the progress wasn't as comparable, but the generalistic LLMs they already give you good hints. I think, of course, what kicks in is if you have specialized knowledge of the HTS, you can quickly understand whether those are rubbish or not, like in most of them. But I think the progress has been great. But from at least my experience, what I can see, the players that really have access to good data, some of the big players in the market that are really big corporations or big clients behind, they have more structured compliance programs, are the ones in a better position to really achieve those steps that really are those final steps in terms of accuracy to really get to another level, should we say. The players that don't have access to that data, from my perception, is that they are still a bit behind, compared to the other ones.
Yeah, fair. I think data is definitely a moat, and some of the incumbents need to realize that they have a moat and they are perhaps sitting on it without adding a technology layer on top of it. Great. Let's switch tracks a bit. You mentioned about defensibility and auditability earlier, so let's go deeper into that. What happens, or how do you really prepare for an audit? How do you ensure that you have the right answers to sometimes tough questions that might come out? Maybe you can break it down to us in very, very simple terms as to how do you really be audit ready? Let's go there, and then we can deep.
So first of all, I think the trade compliance department has to master the technical pillars of trade compliance and also have good governance pillars. So nowadays, of course, there are a lot of guidelines out there that give you good indication how to structure a solid trade compliance program, but it probably boils down to these basics, should I say, in terms of technical pillars: HS classification, origin preferential origin, customs valuation, jurisdiction classification, United Party screening. And then when it comes to the governance pillars, so to have good policies and processes in place, solid record keeping, risk management, awareness and training, of course, of the organization, either internally and externally, and also the technology integration. So when it comes to the audit, so if those technical pillars are mastered, then you know what needs to be done, what needs to be in place. On the governance side, really those processes have to be there in place and the necessary resources. So one of the most important is really the record keeping, to have a solid record keeping. And usually companies tend to forget when, for example, they shift from an ERP to another, that they really have to keep all the historic and access to the historic data. When they shift forward, for example, or the customs broker, that they still have to have access to all that and where that data is stored, how it is stored. So to really prepare for all that and to bear in mind that whenever there are those changes, you really have to understand, okay, how am I going to guarantee access to 5-year-old data in a couple of years' time when I need it for an audit, for example? And also whether you also have the right proof in place. That, for example, within the EU, the companies still struggle sometimes with VAT proof, for example. It's not really trade compliance. And it's not really something, trade compliance usually touches, but can trigger bigger, tax audits, for example, and things like that. So I would say really the focus should be on really have good record keeping and account for those changes in providers, in where the data is stored. Otherwise, you will be faced up with some very unpleasant audits.
Yeah. And let me ask you this. How do you ensure, if you're joining a company as a new employee or as a new leader, how do you ensure that you're not the one who ends up cleaning up the mess that, say, happened 3 to 5 years ago? I just feel that's a risk for your career, and it's just more stress that you didn't ask for, right? So do you guys actually think about that and then make a decision? Like, how do you verify?
That's a very good question, because depending on the organization, sometimes the information needed is kept elsewhere or maintained elsewhere by someone else. And when there's a customs or tax audit, they say, it's up to your compliance, you take care of it. That's always. And, or even in less, more common situations like shipments that are blocked because of some product conformity aspect, they say, oh, customs is blocking, so this is trade compliance. So that happens all the time. But when you join an organization, if you have some experience and also if you are, mindful of what's going on, one of your first steps is really to know the organization, know how it works, what's processes in place, to really understand, okay, what do I need to do? What do I need to be prepared for this? And to really take steps in that sense. Of course, the more you have upper management support, the more you are likely to really get things your way and be prepared for that. The less you have it, the more you're going to struggle, and really with a more spread out organization, you eventually will struggle to really get those other departments or people to cooperate with you and really be prepared. You also have to, should we say, try and make them understand that it's their co-responsibility, and that the more they cooperate, the better for everybody. And also that if things go wrong, there will be severe penalties, and then somebody will have to answer for those. And at the bottom line, so we are called many times to do some firefighting, but the root causes, have nothing to do with us. So we are kind of used to that, or at least the ones with enough experience. And it's always, on a case by case situation where we really understand how we can tackle that, but can be very stressful for sure. Yes.
Yeah, interesting. I think there should be like an interviewing guide for people, like just to make sure that they don't run into a mess that they end up cleaning. You did mention that right now there's a bit of project related initiatives that you're taking up because you just want to put some things in place. While in parallel, I'm guessing business never stops, shipments never stop, your classification exercise never stops, changes keep happening. So how do you practically or realistically balance the two, which is day-to-day BAU work that has to happen on time, but at the same time, you need to invest bandwidth and resources and money on some of these larger initiatives, right? So how do you, first of all, like convince management that both these tracks are required? And two, how do you actually convince your team to do both because they may not have enough bandwidth?
Indeed, and it's also stressful, at times, because you have conflicting priorities. So I try to focus on what is our responsibility and what we can do, and not on things that we cannot manage. Of course, there are the general wide, company priorities, the big projects that you have to support that really are there. But I focus really on the trade compliance part. You don't have the bandwidth to be everywhere, of course, and to keep the regular high risk parts of trade compliance running and focused on those activities. It's hard to say. Yeah, it varies, organization from organization, where you really have to understand, okay, even though there's this big project, I'm going to allocate this amount of time to this project, but every day, at least 1 hour or 2 hours for this to keep these things running, and still have the capability to really step in when asked for an emergency situation. It's part of our day-to-day trade compliance. And the more you are exposed, or you are in a position where you deal with a variety of tasks in trade compliance, the more you feel it. If you are, part of the team is just focused on a particular area, the less you'll feel it, the more you can focus on that. But the more the more responsibilities you undertake and the more areas you undertake, the more you're going to have to keep that juggling act.
I'm smiling because I feel like product management, which is where my background is, product managers have to deal with similar things day after day. Like there's a fire burning somewhere, sales needs your help, marketing needs your help, engineering needs your help, and you're asked to come in and do a bunch of things. Sometimes it's pricing, sometimes it's new products, sometimes it's a support ticket from customers. So I can relate to how every day looks very different for a product manager, and sounds like it's the same for a trade compliance guy as well. No, that's very relatable. Finally, Victor, would love to understand what are some interesting trade stories that you would share with your grandkids. It could be something funny, something scary. What do you think would make for a great dinner time story?
I can give you two quick funny stories and one scarier, should we say.
Sure.
So the first one, probably the most hilarious one, didn't happen with me. It happened with a colleague that came across shipment where somebody was trying to smuggle a Mercedes for an African country in a container full of loose toilet paper rolls. That probably that person didn't realize there are container scanners that can really help customs authorities to identify what's inside the cargo that's inside a container. That was for sure hilarious. And with me, I had, different situations, but a particularly funny one was with a EU-based vendor that classified all his spare parts under just two commodity codes. And we're talking about completely different things like valves, like motors, pumps, controllers, you name it, pipe fittings, under just two commodity codes. And when I said, gentlemen, we have an issue, you have an issue here. This is a really serious, compliance risk, and we have to really keep our commodity codes. They said, "Oh no, this was classified by a customs consultant, so we are absolutely fine. Thank you for your concern." So, but I wonder how much longer they were able to keep that up. But this was a clear example of very high AJS classification risk. And so on the less pleasant side and outside customs audits, it was the unannounced visits of customs authorities responsible for strategic goods and economic sanctions, where they simply showed up unannounced, showing their badge, saying, "Came from customs. Please give me everything related to this." And you're immediately going full alert mode and not knowing what they are after. And as one of those inspections goes on, and it's in a very tense environment, and as they get the answers they want and verify that things are correct, then the tension goes down, and they start opening up a little bit, telling you, "Okay, this is what we're after. This is what you see. This is triggered because of this." And in one of those audits, the inspectors actually said, "Yes, we check all the shipments that you're making, and you really are consistent with this, so everything is fine." So they know more, or they see more than what you think. But that was one of the most tense moments I had in my professional career as trade compliance professional. Yes.
Wow, wow. That's a great story. Great story. No, this has been amazing, Victor. Thank you so much for sharing stories, sharing learnings, and also talking
Welcome.
about some real practical, useful stuff for our audience. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Bye bye.
Awesome.